You're going to Disneyland and you want to ride Rise of the Resistance, the biggest, bestest ride in the entire park. But you've heard horror stories of how terrible standby wait times can be, or how expensive it can be if you want to pay your way to the front of the line. If that's the case, then this might be the most important video you're going to watch. I rode Rise of the Resistance 30 times in 30 days, and along the way, I tracked everything. And I'm going to share everything I learned with you. When to get in standby, when not to get in standby. Just how long is that queue, really? And in the end, one thing I can promise is that everyone who watches this video will learn something they didn't know before. For example, in my 30-day trial, I encountered just 5 breakdowns. Now that may seem like a lot, but given this attraction's notorious history of breakdowns, I was actually expecting considerably more. Further, just 2 of those occurred while I was actually on the ride. On one occasion, I walked out of the queue and thus recorded my only null result in the entire 30-ride trial. And then on the other occasion, it broke down while I was in the interior queue, so I just stayed there. With the other 3 breakdowns, those happened before I showed up, and where I just kind of waited on site, loitered around the area until the ride reopened. And that was useful information as well. The first time this happened, I quote-unquote rope dropped. I stood by for about 40 minutes, and as soon as they started letting guests back in the queue, I jumped in. And it was a delightful sprint to the Ray room in about 5 minutes. And that was, obviously, the single best performance of our 30-ride trial. We got to the Ray room in 5 minutes. By the way, at that point, the standby queue was indicating 60 minutes. And that actually marks our first recommendation of the show. If you can, do try and arrive just after a breakdown. Now, naturally, this act in and of itself requires a time investment. I spent 40 minutes just standing there waiting. And that 40 minutes is no different than spending 40 minutes in the queue. So what have you actually won? It's all about timing. And there's another catch to this as well, actually. And here, I'm going to drop some knowledge on you guys right now. This is really good information. There is a limited window where time can be saved post-breakdown. Write this down. You've got about 15 minutes. You've got 15 minutes between when the ride reopens and they start letting guests in to when you've lost all advantage. It returns to normal capacity, normal wait time in about 15 minutes. In fact, it can be worse. For example, on that occasion, where I sprinted through the queue in just 5 minutes, when I exited the attraction, after I got out of my vehicle, I found this queue waiting for me. This all happened, everything that we're seeing now as we make our way all the way to Doc Ondar's. This happened in the 29 minutes after the ride reopened, and I got in that queue. I got right back in that queue. I did a 5-minute queue, and now I'm going to do this thing. It was brutal. It was as bad as it looked. There was no breaks anywhere. We experienced every inch of the available Rise of the Resistance queue on that day. Meanwhile, I showed up in another occasion about 20 minutes after reopening, and I found a 40-minute wait. I mean, that's still less than the posted wait time, but is that a good time? Is that a win? I'll let you know. Stay tuned. But, as I mentioned, if you can get to Rise of the Resistance within 15 minutes of reopening, you should have a win. So that's our first real breakdown, data breakdown of the show. Actual breakdowns on the attraction. They don't happen as often as you might think relative to the horror stories, even at Rope Drop where I was 2 for 2. We're going to get into Rope Drop as well later on in the show, but for now, let's get into some data. So 30 trips through Rise of the Resistance, and we'll lead off with one piece of data that I'm sure you're all wondering about. Of those 30, all but 2 came in under the posted wait time. One of those was actually exactly the wait time posted. It was posted 90. It took us 90. But on that occasion, I was told before I got into the queue that they were running at half capacity. The other, trip number 30 actually, our very last repetition, was a solid 18 minutes over. Well, we're officially on rep 30, doing my final rep today. And I haven't cherry-picked anything. I don't know if I've said that yet or not in the script, but I plan to go, I show up, and I get in whatever queue is there. And rep 30 looks like it's a pretty bad one. We're not going to make it. There's no way we're going to make it. We're not going to make it. So rare was it to find a time over the posted wait time. So rare was that I'm very confident in calling it an outlier. I'm very confident in saying that the posted wait time will be higher than your actual wait time. I was 29 for 29 up to that point. But by how much? How much are we talking about? Well, on average, just about 20 minutes less than the posted wait time, or 65% of the posted wait time. That is to say, if the posted wait time is 40 minutes, then you could reasonably expect to wait 30 or maybe even less than that. Or if, for example, the posted wait time was 60 minutes, well, now you're looking at maybe a wait of 40. As for the posted wait times, the average was 64 minutes. The average total wait time was 42 minutes. I will repeat that one. Over 30 trials, I waited, on average, 42 minutes. That's all 30 on average. That does include some really good trips, as we mentioned, the 5-minute breakdown and a couple of really successful rope drops where, I got through pretty quickly. But we can remove those from the data as outliers, and you still have an average wait time of just 43 minutes. And that's without removing the other outliers on the other end, the higher than expected wait times. 43 minutes on average. What is the wait time, really though? Where does the clock stop? For most attractions at Disneyland, the clock stops at the ride vehicle. But since Rise is such a full service 360 experience, it's more show than ride, the clock stops when the show starts. And the show starts when we meet Holographic Ray. I call it the Ray Room. Now, here's a fun little bit that you can use to share with your friends. No matter where you stand in the Ray Room, Ray will be looking directly at you. She'll be making eye contact with you directly. She'll even follow you, just like they do in the Haunted Mansion. Now, even though there's more queue later on in the show, Disney defines this room as the official start of your show. Everything before that is queue. Speaking of which, I didn't just measure how long it takes to get to the Ray Room. I did a heck of a lot more than that. You see, in my opinion, the true purpose of wait time science is to inform the guest before they get in the queue. I want to be able to arrive at an attraction, look at the queue, and say, this is a go or this is a no-go. And it's not just about the posted wait time. It's not about looking at the board and saying 60 minutes is too high, 30 minutes is good, let's do it, let's not do it. And that's because the posted wait time is going to be wrong. Almost always, the posted wait time is not going to be correct. So what you've got to do is use your eyes and do the math. And this is best done by establishing benchmarks or zones in the queue, segments that you can assign a time value to. In the case of Rise of the Resistance, you got to find the back of the queue and then add up the segments. There are 6 queue segments for Rise of the Resistance. They are the interior queue and the cave, then 4 distinct sections in the exterior visible queue, all given very clever names. This is Section 1. This U-shaped area here is Section 2. And then another U-shaped area here is Section 3. And then this last piece on the way to Hungry Bear, that's Section 4. Most often, you will find the back of the queue in either Section 3 or, and this might surprise you, Section 1. If you see the queue in Section 4, just keep on walking. Try again later. You will find a better opportunity later in the day. I found Section 4 just 4 times, though, out of those 30. Now, you might get lucky, but you probably won't do anything better than maybe 40 minutes is optimistic at that point. 60 is more likely. Section 3 usually takes about 4 minutes when full. Same for Sections 2 and 1. So let's say you find the back of the queue to be halfway into Section 3. That means you're looking at 10 minutes to get to the cave. 4 minutes for Sections 1 and 2, plus 2 minutes for half of Section 3. The cave, meanwhile, takes on average about 7 minutes. And then the interior queue takes about 22 minutes. This, of course, is the longest section of the queue. So times can vary quite a bit, but again, on average, 22 minutes. I didn't separate the interior queue into sections like I did the exterior queue, mostly because you can't see it. And I want to break things up into sections for those parts of the queue that you as a guest can see from the outside so they can make an informed decision before they get in. So going back to our halfway through section 3 scenario, that was 10 minutes through those exterior sections, 7 minutes in the cave, 22 minutes in the Ray room. That's a total of 39 minutes. Right in line with our statistical average of 42 minutes standby wait. Your results may vary, but I can tell you that after 30 reps in 30 days, I feel pretty good about those estimates. So that's the queue math. You got to look at the sections, add them up, and then make an informed decision. But there is another bit of useful information that you can add to that informed decision, and that is you need to check on Lightning Lane. Check the return time on the app for individual Lightning Lane. Let's say you were going to buy one right now. When would your return time be? Then check the actual queue, the Lightning Lane queue, to see if there's anybody in it. As for individual Lightning Lane, if the return time is now, you're in good shape. If the return time is an hour from now, not so good shape. If you see a dozen people in the Lightning Lane queue, not a great sign. But if the queue is empty, then you've got a pretty good chance of beating that posted wait time by that 20-minute number. Observe the posted wait time, find the back of the queue, do the queue math, check the Lightning Lane return time, check the Lightning Lane queue, make an informed judgment. And those 6 steps, that right there is the heart of Ride Recon. That is everything that I'm trying to do when I'm collecting data and making assessments of standby wait times. Those 6 steps. So hopefully I've made it digestible. If you have questions though, let us know in the comments, and of course, we'll try to answer those for you. We'll pause the analytics for a bit for what I believe to be a very fun, time-saving hack for Rise. And that is, wait by the shuttle door. There is no queue inside the shuttle, just a collection of people. You watch the show for a bit, enjoy Poe Dameron giving 100% effort in the video, but when the shuttle gets stuck in the tractor beam, tell them nothing. That's when you make your way to those same doors that you enter. And after that first order fascist is done yelling at you, he or she will then tell you to get off the ship. Those standing right by the door can then bolt out of there, getting a head start over everyone else in the shuttle. It's not a huge time saver, but it's fun. By the way, right after that, there are always 2 queues as you go around that corner, as you make that left. So if one looks definitely shorter than the other, go ahead. Even if it's completely empty, there are always 2 queues, never just one. Feel free to take the short one. Now, let's get back into that data. On posted wait times, you will most likely find it in the 45 to 60 minute range, with 45 minutes being the most common singular time. That right there, 45 minutes, that tells you that Rise is not quite as competitive as it used to be. Here's another interesting observation. Never was the posted wait time under 45. Yet we've had many time trials that were under 45, which we'll get to. And then finally, 9 of the 30 reps fell in that 60 plus range. Now, what if you rode Rise 30 times? What should you expect? Well, how about half of those times being 30 minutes or under? Yes, half. You might be wondering if those times were cherry-picked. They were not. I showed up at all times of the day and on different kinds of days under different kinds of conditions. But there are commonalities among those times that were under 30 minutes. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. As for the other 16 trips, one was a breakdown. 5 more were in the 30 to 45 minute range, which I still consider that a win as well. So now that's 19 of the 30 trips were in under 45 minutes. And then the 7 remaining were in the 60 plus range. But again, I got a pretty good idea how to avoid those trips as well. But what this means really is that the super long waits are not the norm. They are the exception. Which, if there's anything that I took from this project myself, it's that. It's that Rise is not the scary monster many of us thought it was. In the majority of cases, it was just like any other attraction at Disneyland. Easier, maybe. We're going to find out when we start looking at attractions like Radiator Springs Racers, Runaway Railway, or even something like Matterhorn. We're going to find out how not scary Rise is compared to those other attractions. So what about those 14 rides in under 13 minutes? 4 of them were either at rope drop or shortly after rope drop. I figure you've got until about 9:30 a.m. After that, just like the rest of Disneyland, things start to get more intense. But before 9:30, maybe even 10 a.m. if you're lucky, it's kind of nice. By the way, let me just say this while we're talking about rope drop, because we've done entire videos on this about whether or not you should rope drop Rise of the Resistance. And for me, it's all about what's important to you. Do rope drop it if Rise is like the most important thing you want to do that day, or if you maybe even you want to go a couple times. Then yeah, go for it. Rope drop Rise of the Resistance. But you run the risk of it not opening on time, which is something that happens. We were okay on our visits, but it can happen. Also, rope drop could cost you your entire rope drop experience. If there's a breakdown, you're lucky if it's at rope drop. Then you just know right away, and you lose maybe 10 minutes of your morning, and you can kind of recover. But there is still an impact. Our rope drop pattern is Space Mountain, Matterhorn, Big Thunder, Indiana Jones. Normally we can hit those 4 attractions in a good, 80 minutes, an hour and a half. 3 of those within an hour for sure. But doing that requires that you follow that pattern and you start at rope drop. If you try to start Space Mountain at 8:30, you're going to add 20 minutes. If you go to rope drop Rise first, you miss. It's going to take you X minutes to get over to Space Mountain, probably 10-minute walk. In that time, the 10 minutes you've lost walking there and the 10 minutes you've lost walking back, it's 8:20 now at this point, at best. You've added 20 minutes to your Space Mountain wait. And then another 10 or 15 because of that to Matterhorn or Big Thunder. It's compounding. The further you get into the morning, the more time you add on to the wait. And that's if you find Rise closed when you get there. If it closes while you're in the queue, then your rope drop advantage is definitely gone. It's completely gone. This is a Rise video. If you do rope drop Rise, a couple things. First, get to the rope by 7:30 a.m. if you can. Second, definitely go through Frontierland. I know it's a big crowd, but that's the direction the queue forms. There's this temptation to think you can beat the crowd if you do an end around through New Orleans Square in Critter Country. It actually takes 1 minute longer to walk from the rope to the entrance to Rise of the Resistance through New Orleans Square than it does through Frontierland. Is a quicker walk. In spite of the fact that that's where everybody's going, it's still a quicker walk. Plus, if you go through Critter Country, then you have to walk through the length of the queue that's already been forming. You're going against the grain. All those guests in frame right now, that while we're standing in the queue, they're going the wrong way. They went the wrong way, and they're losing precious time by making their way to the back of the queue. Frontierland takes you directly to the back of the queue. And then third, try making Rise your third or fourth stop. Not your first stop, but your third or fourth stop. If you rope drop, you're still going to spend a good 10 or 15 minutes getting to the rave room. Minimum, right? It's a 5-minute walk, plus it's another 5 or 10 minutes just to get to the rave room. That's a long queue. It's a long queue and it's a long walk. There's a definite time commitment, even if it goes well. And you can get out at, as that other picture showed, 8:35 a.m. is when I got out of that rope drop trip. I mean, that's good, but where are you going to go from here? It's going to take you 10 minutes to walk to Space Mountain or whatever, and you've lost some of that advantage. Rope drop Space, Matterhorn, and Big Thunder, and then at 9 o'clock, that's about when you should get there. From there, hit Rise. Getting to Rise now at 9 a.m. gives you a 20 or a 30-minute wait, tops, at Rise, if things go well. That's a great deal, in my opinion. You've traded Space Mountain, Matterhorn, and Big Thunder for a 20-minute wait on Rise of the Resistance. Okay, 2 more of those 14 trips were within 15 minutes of the attraction reopening after breakdown, something we spoke about in the opening of this show. 3 were right before or right after a parade ended. My recommendation window here is 30 minutes before showtime, and then maybe 15 minutes after showtime. But that's actually a very good tip, a very useful one. That's one to remember. If, let's say, there's a 3:30 parade, show up at Rise of the Resistance at 3 p.m. If there's a 6:30 parade, show up at Rise of the Resistance at about 6 p.m. If there's a 9:30 fireworks show, show up at Rise at 9 p.m., assuming that it's open, because there's a chance that it wouldn't be. But don't wait too long. Don't wait until after the parade is over, or even while it's still underway, because the parade moves, and as soon as that parade is done, that portion of the crowd is going to start making their way back into the parks. That crowd will begin finding their way to Rise of the Resistance. So I would say at most 15 minutes after showtime. 3:30 parade, 3:45. After 3:45, you're going to start hitting regular queue times. And then again, for those 14, 2 were super late. After 8:30 p.m., which is late for Rise, by the way, as the attraction still closes typically by 10 p.m. And then the other 3 were just random lucky wins, which should tell you that there is no single secret recipe. You have a pretty good chance of getting a win at different times during the day. Not all day. There are times to avoid. What times should you avoid? There is an answer, sort of. There were no repeatable conditions for the high weight outliers like they were for the low weight, like the parade or rope drop or something like that. Of those high weight outliers, one of them, it was well after a parade, and while guests were also streaming in from DCA, they were park hopping after they were kicked out from Oogie Boogie Bash. That was a mess. There was the one we showed earlier where I got in line 30 minutes after a breakdown reopening. That was a mess. But the others were just random times. But I do think going right in the middle of the early afternoon is not wise. I would say between noon and 3 p.m. Don't go to Rise of the Resistance between noon and 3 p.m. That's when you should be doing non-Lightning Lane attractions. Things like Pirates or hitting the Fantasyland Dark rides. Is that it? That was a lot, right? Let me try to organize things for you just a bit. Best times to ride are between 8 and 9:30 a.m. just before a parade or another major show starts, like 30 minutes before showtime. Within 15 minutes of the ride reopening after a breakdown, or the last hour to hour and a half before the ride closes. And then try to avoid noon to 3 p.m. If you can't do any of that, if you just happen to be in the area at some random point in the afternoons, that's still okay. If you can't do that, do the ride math and make a judgment. In most cases, I think you'll find the attraction will meet all 6 of those criteria. But in the big picture, don't be too afraid of Rise of the Resistance in general. On average, your wait is going to be 45 minutes, which isn't bad at all. Certainly no worse than any other major attraction in the park. Personally, for a long while, I avoided Rise, but after this recon mission, I would have no problem with jumping in the queue under most conditions. I feel pretty confident about my abilities to assess the attraction now. I may wait a little while. I did just go 30 times, so maybe I don't need to enjoy Rise for a little while. For now, you can find me at Radiator Springs Racer, so stay tuned for that one. Then follow us on Instagram at _FreshBaked, on X at FreshBakedDisney, that's fresh with no E, and on TikTok at FreshBakedDisney. If you like our show and want to show your support, please do consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/freshbaked. By the way, I will be sharing some stories about this project with our Patreon fans. I'll be discussing certain sessions that we had and talking more about, more detail about my experiences, getting a little more intimate with each ride experience, doing the same with what I've found already so far with Radiator Springs Racers. So I hope you can find us on Patreon as well. But otherwise, be safe out there, everybody. Be kind to one another. And fresh baked.